Well, you know who this guy is. It's Paul Finebaum, joined right now on Off the Hook Sports. And Paul, we certainly appreciate the time. How many SEC Media Days is this for you?
Well, my first one was 1985, the first one. So I think that would encompass almost 40 years.
That's a few years. Have you thought about how much longer you want to do this?
I try not to, but I have a feeling it won't be that much longer.
Well, the crazy thing is you've always got something new, and this year it's Texas and Oklahoma.
Yeah.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about the ties between Oklahoma and Josh Heupel. Given where I'm from, they seem strained now, but what do you think long term of those?
I was been in Norman twice in recent weeks, and his name comes up just sitting around. People out there really have tremendous respect for him, and I think it's not. If I could speak for Josh Heupel here,
he doesn't say anything himself, so we need you to.
It's not really an Oklahoma issue. It was a Bob Stoops issue. And I'm not saying that Bob Stoops isn't part of that program. He's still very respected. But the fact that Bob Stoops handpicked Lincoln Riley has been like one check mark against him because Lincoln is despised out there now. And that's really that was what happened. They replaced Josh with Lincoln Riley, who, by the way, two Heisman Trophy winners and a couple of playoffs. But I think when Tennessee gets out there in a few weeks, the reception is going to be thunderous. And I think whatever happened in the past will be a thing of just that.
When I started in this business, and maybe you too, we were a bit naive. A coach told us something, we just believed it. I actually, though, believe that Josh Heupel is dedicated to the University of Tennessee and sees it as a destination job. Do you agree with that?
I agree. He's got a really fantastic boss. And the person that, let's say Vanderbilt didn't work out, which I think he will because they just gave him a 6-year contract extension. Joe Castiglione, he's not going to be around much longer as the AD. So I think he would be. I think Heupel would probably be very hesitant to go out there with somebody who won't be there to be with him. Joe told me President David Warren and Bob Stoops were together there for 20 years at the same time. That's continuity, and I think that's the most important thing a coach wants. It's not how much money am I going to make, because they all make an absurd amount of money. It's not is Tennessee versus Oklahoma, is one better than the other. They're both at the top of the heap. It's who do I trust? And I think considering Danny White hired Josh twice now, that's who we trust.
Absolutely, I agree with that. Can you discuss the high that Tennessee's on right now? I don't know if you ever believed in battered ball syndrome, but
sure,
it was out there. Is it dead now?
I think it is, and I think the fact that the baseball championship was really significant and symbolic. But it was funny. I said something about Lane Kiffin a few weeks ago, and he reacted by saying, "Oh, you guys at Tennessee just won a natty. Well, why are you so mad?" I mean, so it's what happened with the Tellus team is part of the conversation encompassing Tennessee. But I think Tennessee football, which is obviously phenomenal shape. I felt like last year was a disappointment, but it was still a pretty good year by most coaches' standards who have been at Tennessee in modern history.
Have you put out your predictions yet for the season? Is that
I think Tennessee is. I mean, I think you have this very predictable and overstated Texas following Georgia, and then maybe Alabama, Ole Miss. I think Tennessee is on that next rung where if they can turn a game or two, and I think it really is the Alabama game. I think if Tennessee beats Alabama, and I think it's certainly possible, then they go from 9-3 to 10-2. And I don't think 9-3 is where you want to be trying to get into the playoffs. It could get you in if you had some big win at the end of the year that tells you. But I think you want to be at 10-2. And if you look at Tennessee's schedule, we know Georgia. The Oklahoma game is tricky. And I think Alabama is a game that Tennessee has to win. And I'm not. It's hard to predict that game yet because there's so many intangibles. But I think Tennessee is on the edge of the playoffs right now.
Paul Finebaum, you know him, of the SEC Network and ESPN. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.
It was my pleasure.
That was Paul Finebaum. Give a few interesting takes. Paul Finebaum, just full disclosure, for those who don't know, I'm sure everybody knows, but I just want to be very clear, is a Tennessee grad. So you could say he's biased to the Vols, but he's been tied to Alabama for 30 years now, and he's been covering them in Birmingham with his radio show that he did for so many years. And he's been very open about different programs at different times. And he thinks Josh Heupel's committed to Tennessee. And he's very tied to the inside. And Dave has been telling us that, guys, too. If Josh Heupel is committed to the Vols, that's a really big statement, honestly. Because Josh Heupel, I mean, you would think you'd want to go back to his alma mater. I've always talked about the whole Bob Stoops situation. And Paul Finebaum brought up a great point I didn't even think about. Oklahoma's athletic director situation is kind of in flux right now. They got an older athletic director. And you may not want that situation as a head coach when you want the stability. The battered Vol syndrome thing, it is very intriguing. And he made a great point about the College Baseball World Series, because the reason that's so relevant is even last year, Tennessee, even up until the College World Series, Tennessee had a top 3 athletic department. If you look at the Directors Cup standings and things like that, and they kept knocking on the door in every sport, and they were just unable to break through. Now, finally, with the College World Series, they break through. They actually get a national title, and it's kind of one of those where once you get that monkey off your back, maybe you can start winning a little bit more. An example I use is in the mid-'90s, Tennessee would get blown out by Florida. They finally beat them in 98, 20-17 off a last-second field goal. And yes, they lose in 99 and 2000, but it was close both times, and they go and win in 2001 in the Fulham or Spurrier rivalries. So I think that when you get over that hump, that one mental hurdle, it affects the rest of the team, and I think it affects the fan bases too. I still think battered Vol syndrome is a thing in football. Football is a different animal altogether. A baseball championship is not going to outweigh that. You're talking about a program that had a decade of dysfunction. 2 years ago was on the verge of reaching the college football playoff and had a just bizarre blowout loss that nobody could explain to South Carolina. So I understand there's still the issue of battered Vol syndrome. I mean, heck, they lost to Florida in 2020. They lost to Florida last year, which just doesn't make any sense in 2023 because they were a significantly better team. So there's a lot of reason to still have battered Vol syndrome. Okay, this team has a lot of questions, a lot of things we don't know, but I will say that Paul Finebaum thinking it's over does carry some weight. Now, again, Paul Finebaum was more tied to Alabama during the decade of dysfunction. Even though he's a Tennessee grad, he was much more connected to Tennessee during the majors years. So I think that he may not be as deeply tied to the program to understand it as some other people. But I do think it's going away. And depending on what Tennessee football does this year, it could go away permanently. We still don't know yet. And also, again, battered Vol syndrome, for those who don't know, was a thing in the 90s. I mean, fans felt that they kept knocking on the door in football for years during the late major years and throughout the prime of the Fulmer years, and then they just couldn't knock it down. They knock it down in 98. You think battered Vol syndrome's over, it's done infecting the program, and then they haven't won an SEC title since then. So you just really never know how these things are going to work out. It's very hit or miss. I do think that the big takeaway from Paul Finebaum's interview with Dave, though, is him thinking Josh Heupel is committed to Tennessee. And the athletic director situation is a big reason. The Bob Stoops situation is an obvious one. And you're right. I think at some point Oklahoma will cut bait with Bob Stoops just to try to bring Josh Heupel back if he continues to have success, because as Paul Finebaum pointed out, Lincoln Riley's no longer popular in Oklahoma. Lincoln Riley was the person that Bob Stoops hired to replace Josh Heupel as offensive coordinator in 2015 before he was then promoted to head coach of Oklahoma, and now he's since bailed. So that's hurt everything, and the lack of success Bob Stoops had and the lack of success Lincoln Riley had, and I mean lack of national titles, and how things played out down the stretch is going to have people leaning more towards Josh Heupel as time goes on. But You got to question the stability of the athletic department, and no one knows how that's going to work out at Tennessee, which is why at this moment, there's plenty of reason to believe Josh Heupel is committed to Tennessee long-term and not going back to his alma mater, which is interesting.